The banquet hall went silent the moment Marcus Webb pointed across the room and laughed loud enough for every table to hear, sneering that the man in the thrift store blazer folding napkins for extra cash was still exactly the nobody he'd always been back in high school. Grant Holloway felt his face burn as 200 pairs of eyes turned toward him, the same eyes that used to watch Marcus shove him into lockers 15 years ago, and for one terrible second he wanted to walk straight out of the Ridgemont High reunion and never look back. If you believe people deserve second chances, and that kindness can walk into a room and change everything, smash that like button, drop a comment below, share this with someone who needs it, and subscribe to Kindness Vault before we go any further, because this story is about to remind you why we never stop believing in good people. Grant hadn't wanted to come tonight. Raising his 6-year-old daughter Nora alone since his wife passed had swallowed every spare hour and every spare dollar he had, and the only reason he'd agreed to work the reunion as part of the catering staff was because it paid triple time and Nora needed new shoes for first grade. He told himself it didn't matter that he'd once dreamed of walking into this same gymnasium as a success story instead of the help. He told himself pride was a luxury he couldn't afford. Marcus Webb, now a real estate broker with a spray tan and a watch that cost more than Grant's car, hadn't changed at all. In high school he'd built his popularity on making other people small, and apparently success had only sharpened the habit. He strutted over with 2 of his old football buddies trailing behind him like they were still 17, and he asked Grant, loud enough for the whole room, whether folding napkins was really the best a Ridgemont valedictorian runner-up could do with his life. Grant's hands trembled around the stack of linen. He thought about Nora asleep at his mother's house, her small shoes with the sole peeling off, and he thought about the years he'd spent working double shifts after his wife's diagnosis, then after the funeral, just trying to keep a roof over his daughter's head. None of that mattered to Marcus. None of it ever had. Grant opened his mouth to say something, anything, but the words caught in his throat the way they always had when he was 16 and scared. That was when the room shifted. A tall man in a charcoal suit rose from a table near the stage, and the murmur that followed him was immediate, because everyone recognized the face from magazine covers and business news segments. Wesley Cho, founder and CEO of Northline Robotics, one of the fastest-growing tech companies on the West Coast, crossed the banquet hall with the kind of quiet authority that made people instinctively step aside. He walked straight past Marcus, straight past the football buddies still smirking, and put his hand firmly on Grant's shoulder. "He's with me," Wesley said simply, loud enough for the tables nearby to hear, and then he turned to Marcus with an expression that wasn't angry, just unbothered in a way that made Marcus's smirk falter. He said Grant had been the only person in this entire school who ever sat with him during freshman year, back when Wesley was the awkward transfer kid with a stutter and no friends, back when everyone else looked right through him. He said Grant used to save him a seat at lunch without ever making it a big deal, used to walk with him between classes so the hallway bullies would back off, and never once asked for anything in return. The room had gone quiet again, but this silence felt different. Marcus tried to laugh it off, tried to say he was only joking, but his voice had lost its edge. Wesley didn't raise his voice either. He simply said that character reveals itself in how people treat others when there's nothing to gain, and that some of the richest men in the room tonight had learned that lesson from a man in a thrift store blazer folding napkins. Grant stood there with his throat tight, memories rushing back of a skinny, stammering kid he'd barely thought about in years, a kid he'd helped without a second thought because it had seemed like the obviously right thing to do. He hadn't known that small kindness had followed Wesley all the way to a company worth hundreds of millions of dollars. He hadn't known it had mattered at all. Wesley asked Grant to sit with him for the rest of the evening, and when Grant hesitated, glancing at his half-finished catering duties, Wesley simply told the event coordinator that dinner was on him and Grant's shift was over. For the first time in longer than he could remember, Grant let himself be seen not as the help, not as the reunion's cautionary tale, but as a guest, as a man whose quiet decency had outlasted every insult Marcus ever threw his way. Over the next hour, at a table full of classmates who suddenly wanted to know his story, Grant found himself talking about Nora, about the mornings he braided her hair before school because there was no one else to do it, about the nights he sat by her bed after her mother died and promised her the world would still be good to her. Wesley listened to every word, and before the night ended he asked if Grant would consider coming in for an interview, not out of pity, he said clearly, but because Northline needed people who understood what it meant to hold a team together through hard seasons, and he couldn't think of anyone better suited for that than the man who once did it for him for free. Grant drove home that night with his hands steady on the wheel for the first time in years, the reunion's laughter and shame fading behind him like a storm that had finally broken. He picked Nora up from his mother's house even though it was late, carried her sleeping weight to the car, and looked at her small face in the rearview mirror the whole drive home, thinking that maybe, finally, things were about to change for both of them. If this story moved you even a little, if it reminded you that kindness never really disappears, it just waits for the right moment to come back around, please take a second to like this video, leave a comment, and share it with someone who needs a little hope today. And before we go, drop the word kindness in the comments below if you believe every quiet act of goodness eventually finds its way back to the person who gave it. Grant Holloway went to that reunion expecting to be reminded of everything he hadn't become. Instead, he walked out reminded of who he'd always been, a man who chose kindness even when no one was watching, and it turned out someone had been watching all along.